The life of Detroit's most notorious hitman, Nathaniel Boone Craft.
To start where we left off, Boone's nephew James Lee Dennard, nicknamed Jimmy the Bruiser, would introduce him to the Brown brothers, Reggie and Terrence. The two brothers quickly took notice of Boone's fighting prowess, and they would try recruiting him to the best friend's gang, but at the time he was already working for Maserati Rick. Rick actually first met Boone when he had to defuse a situation about to turn deadly, and he ended up paying him $600 just to hang out. By the end of the day, Rick would pay him $2,000 up front to be his personal bodyguard. Some time goes by and Boone was actually with Rick when they chased down Big Ed Hansard, although Ed got away after he pulled behind someone's house. After this incident, Boone was told that Big Ed had to go. The only problem was that Rick was adamant about helping. So around 1988, Rick and Boone would lay in wait for Big Ed, and when he appeared, both men would unload with automatic weapons. Big Ed was shot multiple times, but ultimately survived. Boone actually blames the failed attack on Rick, saying that he actually ran in front of him. This single event would lead to Maserati Rick's downfall. It was the summer of 1988, and Big Ed would make his move, attacking the 29-year-old drug lord outside of one of his car washes. Believe it or not, neither man was arrested, because both men declined to identify the other as the aggressor. Boone says Rick would have never been shot though, if he wouldn't have left him at the house. He would go on to say that he literally woke up to the news that Rick was shot, and hollered to the back room because he thought Rick was still there. He would quickly realize that it actually was Rick, and immediately rushed to the hospital. Boone would make it to the hospital, and he's in Rick's room guarding him, because after all he was still being paid, when Terrence Boo Brown walks in. The two men are talking and Terrence brings up the fact that Rick didn't want them to retaliate. He would go on to say that word has already gotten out, Rick's a bitch, and he's making best friends look weak. Terrence would then tell Boone that he's good to leave, but Boone responded, "Rick's paying me to be here." And that's when Terrence handed him double the amount of money, and by that point, Boone got the message loud and clear and left the room. Boone says the Brown brothers were already in the process of snuffing out Rick and taking over the whole operation ever since meeting the plug Colombian Mike. To this day, Boone believes the Brown brothers are responsible for Rick's death, specifically Terrence. He said he knew it was over for Rick when Terrence said the Colombian said he don't care what happens to Rick as long as someone pays his bill. If the Colombian would have backed Rick, things may have ended differently. But unfortunately that wasn't the case, and on September 12, 1988, two men walked into Rick's room at Detroit's Mount Carmel Mercy Hospital and shot him. After Rick's death, the Brown brothers and Boone attended the funeral with the best friend's gang and kept up appearances. The dirt wasn't even settled, and they went to Rick's girlfriend's house and wheeled out the safe on a dolly. Little side note, Maserati Rick was actually buried in a Mercedes coffin, with wheels and all. It wouldn't be but a month later, and Boone was arrested for possession after being pulled over, and the police found a baggie in the glove box. Apparently Terrence had his car earlier that day, but ultimately Boone knew it was his fault for not checking. He would end up taking a plea deal, and was sentenced to a year and a half. It was while Boone was locked up that he would get the tragic news that his little brother, Andre, was shot and killed. It wouldn't be until Andre's funeral that Boone would find out who murdered him. His nephew, Jimmy the Bruiser, would tell him that Andre got a front from Terrence, but when it was time to pay, he told him to go see his older brother, Boone. At first, Boone didn't want to believe it, but he quickly realized it was the truth when neither Brown brother showed up to the funeral, nor did they send their condolences. It wouldn't be until best friend's member Mark Patrick was gunned down that Boone would finally come face to face with Terrence. And to his surprise, Terrence acted as if nothing was wrong. A bit later, Charles Chucky Doo Wilkes came up to Boone and asked if he was interested in doing a job. Boone responded, "If the price is right." They would offer Boone $20,000 for the job, and he reluctantly agreed. They would then explain to him that Mark Patrick's older brother retaliated for his murder, but was ultimately arrested and charged with first-degree murder and assault with intent to murder. But there's a catch. The entire case comes down to just one witness, and that's where Boone comes in. They wanted his help tracking down and ending this liability. They would ultimately find their target as he was getting into a taxi cab, and the three men, Boone, Charles Wilkes, and Stacy Colbert, all unloaded, killing their target and the driver. It would be at this moment that Boone felt a sharp pain in his back, and when he reached around and felt it with his hand, he seen blood. He had been shot. He quickly realized that he had been double-crossed, and the men just rolled him out of the vehicle and left him for dead. It would be by sheer luck that Boone survived, but that being said, the shooting was a violation of his parole, and consequently, he was sentenced to 12 to 30 years. By this point, all Boone cared about was getting revenge against Terrence, Wilkes, and anyone else that betrayed him. At the end of the day, Boone would cooperate with authorities, and in 1991 he was convicted. He would serve 17 years, finally being released in 2008. Due to parole requirements, he surprisingly lives in Detroit to this day. If you want to know what happened to all these guys, stay tuned for the final part. Thanks for watching, and remember, if it's more interesting, you can find it here.